So you want to be a millionaire?
Yeah. So Howie Mandel. And this new show is called Take It All. Take It All. Have you heard of it? So the premise goes a little bit like this. There are people who are competing. I don't know how they win, but they win, or they have in their cash these prizes, these luxury prizes. So it's like a really fancy vacation, or a luxury car, or some great jewelry, or something like really, really expensive things that they compete somehow, and they get to take whatever it is that they're competing for. But then there's like a process of elimination, I guess, and at the end of this is hard to put together from the website, so I hope I have this right. But at the end, they have two contestants who then are competing. They can either say, I want to keep my stuff that I've already won, or I want to take it all, meaning that you would get yours as well as the other contestants' luxury things. And you make an announcement at the end if you're going to keep your stuff or if you're going to take it all. Now the problem is if both players say they want to take it all, both go home with nothing. And so essentially the contestants are trying to bluff one another into what it is that they're going to say, because of course everyone wants to go home with these big fancy riches that they should have just got. Do you want to take it all, or do I want to keep mine? The stakes are pretty high because in typical Howie Mandel fashion, he makes things like that bracelet or that trip or that car seem like it would be the best thing in the world. And when you have that in your hands, you don't really want to let it go. Well, the commercial caught my attention because it seems that, again, there's a lot of hype in the world about bluffing. Because that's really, I think, now I haven't seen the show, it doesn't even start until the end of December, but it seems like it really is based around how believable can people be with their lie, with bluffing. And so it's a show about bluffing and lying and cheating and tricking others. And it's like yet another show about that kind of thing. This show, Take It All, isn't the first show that's like that. And it isn't working with that question, what is truth? What's truth? There was Truth or Consequences, another game show, remember that one? Then, like at home, we might have played Truth or Dare, but don't raise your hands if you did, because I don't want to know. Even poker is a game of strategy and bluffing, not telling the truth. We're familiar with little white lies, and we can likely tell a story about when we or someone else told or heard a little white lie, or maybe a big hairy lie that really changed everything, that we watched it do all kinds of damage. Lying seems to really, really be alive and well in the world. And you can make jokes about politicians, and you can make jokes about families where people aren't telling the truth, and you can tell stories about neighborhood associations, and you can tell all kinds of different stories about how people lie these days. And you might expect that right now I'm going to launch into this beautiful little sermon about how you should never tell a lie. You should always tell the truth. Make it a nice, tidy, neat little moral sermon. But I don't think that's what the gospel is. I don't think that's what's... Bless you. God bless you. I'm not saying that telling a lie is a good thing, but I'm saying that when Pilate asks Jesus, what is truth? They're talking about something bigger than telling the truth or telling a lie. Now, history tells us that Pilate was not a nice guy. He ruled with a strong arm and a hard heart. And with both a deep desire for power and this insatiable need for riches, Pilate likely wouldn't have been elected in a democratic election. But we don't see that in his exchange with Jesus when we remember the gospel for Good Friday, which is what we're sharing today, Christ the King Sunday. Instead, today, Pilate asks Jesus questions. Are you the king of the Jews? What have you done? So you're a king? What is true? Now we'd expect Pilate, I think, to make announcements, not ask questions. And the exchange that Pilate and Jesus have with the crowd yelling outside in the courtyard and demanding that Jesus be crucified ends in Pilate handing Jesus over to die. So that is all stuff that we remember on Good Friday. You know, the other Black Friday. The Friday that happened earlier in the year, the Friday that happened right before Easter. And so now we're just a month away from Christmas and we're remembering Easter, Good Friday. What's that about? Well, there's a liturgical, and you can say churchy, there's a churchy reason for that. And that's because today we want to remember that Jesus is our King. We crown him, we glorify him, we remember that he's not at all like any other king that we might imagine. He wears a crown of thorns, not a crown of jewels. He wears sackcloth and burlap, not a fancy coat. He serves the people. He sits with the outcasts. He welcomes the sinners. He loves everybody. He makes room for everyone. And that's not exactly what we would expect a king to do. And it's not exactly what gets Jesus ahead. But getting ahead isn't what matters to him. What matters to him instead is to love and to serve as if the world doesn't want to know the truth of it all. So be it. Love and serve, whether or not the people around us want to know the truth. Jesus won't, like Pilate, lead with a strong arm. He's going to rule with a tender heart. He's going to rule with love in his eyes. And so when Pilate calls him into the proverbial principal's office and says to him, "Who are you? What have you done? Are you a king?" Jesus talks in what may sound like gibberish. He says, if I were from this world, my followers would be playing by a different set of rules than what they're doing. But they aren't. The kingdom that I'm from isn't from here. Now, if you've ever asked a question of anybody, and the answer that came to you was in the form of another question, I'm guessing you can imagine how Pilate might have felt. Remember in elementary school, "Teacher, what's 7 times 7? And the teacher would say, "Do you remember your multiplication tables?" And you're like, well, if I remember my multiplication tables, I probably wouldn't ask you what 7 times 7 is. And your teacher says, "Numbers are the foundation of life. Did you know that?" And you just really, really, really want the 49 to come out of her mouth. You don't really care if numbers are the foundation of life. You want to get your homework done. You want to get the answer to your question. Pilate wanted Jesus to answer his questions. Are you the king of the Jews? Yes? No. And Jesus instead launches into this, "Oh, my kingdom is not from this world. If it were, my followers would be there." Pilate's like, "I need to know if you're the king of the Jews." And Jesus says he's come to testify to the truth. Well, that's helpful. And so Pilate says, "Well, what is truth?" And Jesus doesn't say anything at all. What is truth? And he says nothing at all. See, what Jesus is selling isn't the answer to any particular question. It's not a set of morals or of rules. It's not an answer and a letter and a multiple choice quiz. Jesus doesn't offer answers like that. He offers a relationship. He wants us to engage with him, to feel the story, to wrap our own arms around the life that is his. He wants us to engage with a life of service and gratitude, a life of generosity and wonder, a life of forgiveness and devotion. Because, you know, life isn't neat and tidy. Not everything is going to fall into a pro or a con column. And even if we have all the answers, there's nothing that promises the world won't change, that hearts won't change, that life won't change. So knowing faith's multiplication tables keeps us too much in our head. And that's not the only place where we should be when it comes to bringing life and faith together. Pilate and Jesus have a few long conversations at Jesus' trial, which has also been called Pilate's trial, because it wasn't really Jesus who was on trial that day. But when when Pilate says, "What is truth?" I picture the people on that new game show called Take It All, looking at one another and saying, "Well, what is truth? What have you written on your card? Are you going to want to take it all? Or are you going to just keep your stuff? Will I get to take your treasures too?" And Jesus answers Pilate not with words, but with silence, which seems to indicate that Jesus being the truth of life isn't something that can be summed up in some or other words. It seems to indicate that we know the truth when we see it. It's better to live in the truth. I'm one of those people who thinks that the littlest of whitest lies is as destructive as a big old hairy lie. Because when we start to manufacture truth as an alternative to what really is, we get lost. Mark Twain said, "Always tell the truth, that way you don't have to keep track." Because see, the truth that Jesus comes to offer isn't a set of answers. The truth that Jesus offers is that we're going to be able to engage with the real, live, breathing Lord who's in our midst. Jesus gives us a relationship, not a set of rules. And he wants us to be alive in the world in relationship with him. I've sat with so many people who were so heartbroken when they can't figure out what God wants from them in a particular situation. Does God want me to do this or this? Does God want me to do A or B, C or D? Like being an eye doctor, number 1 or number 2, number 3 or number 4. That it's so much bigger than that. What God asks for is for us to be in a living, hearty relationship with God, who's come to earth in the form of Jesus. Christian churches all over the world are celebrating Christ the King Sunday today, remembering that Jesus is the King. And that's a good thing to remember, because we really need to remember that we're not the King. But in addition to remembering that Christ is the King, we also close out the church year and we begin again next week with the beginning of Advent, starting to get ready for Christmas. Christ is the King. Pilate says, "Are you the King? What is truth?" Jesus says, "What is truth?" And then we start all over again, and we prepare to have a baby born in a manger to be our Lord. What is truth? I think you'll find it in your relationships, not in a list of answers. I think you'll find it when you find yourself comforted by something that you never expected would happen. I think you'll find it when someone out of the blue comes to give you a hug or sends you a note or gives you an encouragement or says just the right things. I think you'll find it when you see a sunrise, and if you saw this morning's, it was incredible, or a sunset. The whole point of God sending Jesus to earth was to teach us how to live. How to live with love in our hearts, how to live with love in our hands, love in our feet. How to live being children of the Most High. So today I just want to invite you to keep your life in perspective on this Christ the King Sunday. Remember that your relationship with God is real. There's that old phrase, if you don't feel close to God, who moved? God is walking with us. And as we get into